I thought that I was fighting on the side that's all the good and right by lambasting the people who did not agree with me. And it never occurred to me like, oh, those scriptures about love your neighbor, well, that does not apply when you're talking about your political enemies. God doesn't really expect me to be kind to President Clinton.
Do you get aroused by stimulating intellectual conversation? Are you turned on by the idea of engaging with thought leaders from across the United States? Do you go gaga over exploring important ideas from influential books, research, and essays? Then welcome to Curiosity Porn, the place you can satisfy all those intellectual urges guilt-free. Your hosts are Dr. Guy Crane, Professor of Philosophy at Rose State College, and Professor James Davenport, Professor of Political Science at Rose State College. However, the views expressed here are solely the views of the hosts and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. And now, here are James and Guy. Good afternoon, Guy.
James, how is it going?
You know, it's okay. It's kind of a rainy week off and on this week.
And we are, well, I don't know about you, trying to make it to the finish line of a semester that is just not over yet.
Yes, this has been a weird semester. I thought it was going to start off really, really well. And then I'm telling you, right before spring break, I was like, are we done yet?
Yeah, I know. That's about when I was breaking down already too.
And so I don't know why that is, but it's just been that. It really hasn't been, at least for me, it hasn't been as eventful of a semester as we've had in a while. I mean, things have been pretty calm, but yeah, it's like, dude, I need to rest.
Do you ever get the sense that do you think of summer as like, oh, good, I get a break from work? Or do you think of summer as like, finally, now I get to get some work done?
I used to think of it in both terms, right? Okay. So when I was just a mere faculty member, the summer definitely was a time that I could relax a bit and maybe focus on some projects that I wanted to focus on. Now, as the dark side of administration,
dark side can confirm.
It's still an 8-hour a day raking through the muck kind of a job. Yeah. Right. So, and I shouldn't say that. I am very fortunate in both the people that I work with up above me and even the faculty, great people to work with. I don't have anything to really think anything to complain about. But we've had this conversation before. When you put me in administration, I'm kind of like a fish out of water. I don't feel like I really belong. So, but I've got great people to work with, so I can't be too negative.
Well, I'm looking forward to the summer. I'm bursting at the seams with some new paper ideas and some work to do.
Look at you.
I would love in the future to be talking about them. I'm going to try.
Look at that. I'm jealous. Maybe I'll get a dissertation written over the summer.
I have told you repeatedly, the surefire way to finish a dissertation is to set the defense date.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sometime in the fall of 2025 is the schedule that I'm on. So We'll see. I think I can live with that. I think I can do that.
You can do it.
All right. We got a fantastic guest on.
Yes.
All right. We're going to have Micah Leydorf, who is a former press secretary and deputy chief of staff for a member of Congress. She is also the author of Wingspan, Rising Above the Challenges of Single Parenting, the children's book, Folks Called Me Cherry, and most recently, the book that we're going to be discussing on the program today, The Unseen Battle, An Unexpected Love Story. This is her first novel. In addition to being an author, Micah is also an entrepreneur, an active member in a variety of organizations, and she and her husband, Tom, have 2 teenage sons, and they live here in the Oklahoma City area. So, Micah, welcome to Curiosity Porn.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here with both of you.
Now, we have some get-to-know-you questions that we're going to fire at you. But before we do that, I was just thinking about this on the way over here. You wrote a book. Your book is largely religious-oriented. Right?
It's definitely about faith, yes.
About faith. Yes. And we'll get into talking about, kind of who it's targeted towards and whatnot. I'm just wondering, are you going to get some pushback, some grief for coming on a show named Curiosity Porn while talking about a very religiously based book?
Yeah. I actually like your name. I actually think that it does what is so necessary in today's culture is gets attention. And I did listen to your first podcast where you explained the genesis of the name. So I get that of like, oh, okay, we have all this, real estate porn and,
Sure.
all these other types of just basically, a kind of a release from looking at these things. And so I like the idea of, okay, let's be curious. Let's be positive with our attention. So yes, though, unfortunately, right, it's going to require a little bit of explanation.
Well, I've met your mom a few times, and I'm thinking about my mom, and I'm just like, hey, Mom, I was on this neat podcast called... I haven't even told my mom about this podcast.
She doesn't even know. Well, if she's not a big consumer of podcasts, we might not have much to worry about
if
there.
it's not, well, never mind. I won't even go there. I love my parents. So I was, that was just really talk about curiosity. My curiosity was piqued about how.
We should say, when we came up with the name, there were people who were not fans in our immediate circles.
My wife
sure.
still is not a fan. I'm just saying, right? Now, some of my kids loved it, thought it was great, but my wife was not a big fan of that.
And I should take responsibility too. Really, my wife is the one who narrowed it down to just the two possibilities, and then we chose this one.
Oh, has that been revealed what the other possibility was?
Oh my gosh.
You
got the list somewhere, right?
I'm pretty sure, was it courting controversy?
I think that might have been it.
It might, yeah.
But that's not really what we do so much. It's not as descriptive as...
Yeah, that might have been more of the same. Like you're saying, like if we'd have just been, let's just have a talking heads controversial sort of thing, then like that's not really filling the gap that we're trying to fill, Right.
I don't think that's what you want to do at all, court controversy. No,
not so much. I've got another podcast that does that.
He does that just fine other days of the week. Yeah.
All right, let's get to these rapid fire questions. You want to lead off?
Yeah. What led you to becoming an author?
Okay, so that is a little bit multifaceted, but basically the short answer is I just believe in the power of story to convey truth and to unite people in a way that other avenues can't. Okay. So that's the short version of
avenues
that story.
Like nonfiction academic papers
so,
that we're trying to get eyeballs on.
So I have been drawn to the written word since I was born, right? I love to read. I love to write. I got a master's degree in journalism. I was a press secretary for a decade on Capitol Hill. So yes, I've been writing my whole life. But what drew me to writing fiction was, again, the belief in the power of story to do something that all those other words can't do. Or maybe in a way it can't do that. It's like appeal to the human heart.
Well, very nice.
Yeah. All right. What authors have most influenced your writing?
You toned that one down just for her, didn't you? You know what we usually ask people. You can answer that one. He just softballed you something that we ask a much harder question of other guests.
Well, James and I have known each other for quite a while, so maybe he's afraid of some skeletons coming out.
You never know what might...
But the softball answer, C.S. Lewis, obviously. I mean, I can't write a book that has demons writing letters and not say that C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape letters was not an influence. But then, and people have compared it to Frank Peretti, the novel, like kind of a Peretti for women. Right. I wouldn't say he really was an influence. I kind of intentionally tried not to reread Screw Tape letters or to read Peretti, recently because I didn't want to be overly influenced. Who I would like to be compared to and who I do love is Flannery O'Connor. Just in that whole idea of, again, stories conveying these things these really hard issues of intersection of faith and reality. Also Kurt Thomas is, Kurt Thompson is a recent author who is a psychiatrist who's written a number of books like The Anatomy of the Soul, Soul of Shame. Anyway, a lot of his ideas are definitely and intentionally incorporated into this book. Right. Like the idea of the protagonist of the story, her life coach tells her to pay attention, what she pays attention to. And that definitely comes from Kurt's work, or talking about how shame, affects the human heart and mind, those ideas. So those are some.
Excellent.
Well, what are you currently reading or just listening to or watching Whichever you decide.
Sure. Well, I love the Trinity Forum as like an organization. It's a think tank based out of DC, if you're not familiar with it, that highlights a lot of different authors every week. And actually I had an event there last week when I was in DC kind of promoting the book. And so I love their work. So I listened to a lot of the conversations with authors there to kind of expose me to other voices out there. Also, just again, related to this book, I'm currently looking at Mike Mason's The Mystery of Marriage, because again, the book is about marriage. So these are some of the things. And then also I'm in another called Well-Read Moms. It's a national book club. We read Christian classics. And again, I love book clubs because again, I feel like they introduce you to authors otherwise you wouldn't read. And then of course, then they make you read them. So I have that stack of books on my bedside table that everybody does, thinking like, oh, these are books I bought that I want to read, but oh, I need to read this one for my book club that's meeting like next week. So what am I actually going to read is the ones you're reading in community with other people.
Sometimes book clubs force you to read books.
Yeah, I have heard this before. We had a book club for a long time, and that
two of you or more?
Yeah, we had. They got up to four, maybe five.
Yeah. Your sister joined at one point, so that was a fifth member.
Yeah,
and it was very much a book club though for the eat your vegetables kind of things that we all really needed to read, but weren't going to ever get around to doing so leisurely, right?
So who decided what the selections were?
We kind of rotated back and forth.
Both he and I basically had the same interest. We were looking at the political philosophy of the modern period and fizzled out because I had writing projects and then you started a dissertation program.
Right.
But
we still actually get together with some of the folks in the book club every now and then just to visit and banter ideas around.
But I deeply relate to what you're saying. I got a stack about 7 high right now of things that like I bought and I'm like, that is the next book. And then I instead buy another book instead of reading the ones that I've got. It's pretty painful.
Yes, I think it's a common problem.
I always have a bevy of books that I request at Christmas time. That's part of my Christmas gifts for my family. And I will inevitably, over that Christmas break, get 2 or 3 of them read. And then the rest kind of sit on the shelves waiting for their turn. So
I will say that audiobooks have been a partial solution to that problem for me. So, it's like, oh, it has stacked by my bed. So am I going to sit there and read it at night? But, oh, can I listen to it while I'm driving or while I'm doing the dishes or cooking or whatever? Then it's like, okay, that actually gets read which is one of the reasons why I did have an audiobook created of this. And I find that women really,
do they like that?
Oh, yes. Like I went to a conference lately and I got that exact thing like, oh, it looks good, but I have so many things to read. I'm like, oh, well, actually, there's this audiobook version. They're like, okay, sold, right?
I need to consider that. I don't know if you're capable of that, James. You need to look inside any book that he has ever read. And the thing, you might get out a highlighter. You might even get out a pen and underline something really important. With James, it's every single word. Every single word is underlined. If it's all important,
you must read some good stuff.
I think it's good, but the guy gets on to me all the time. He's like, it kind of defeats the purpose to have the whole page underlined. It doesn't really, and I'm like, but I couldn't just choose one part of it to underline. It all sounded good. And
that's where you need these little Post-its, that you just put in the
And so that is the problem, right, with audiobooks for me is I like to underline, I like to write notes in the margins, these kind of things. But I will say my wife and I have been listening to audiobooks when we're in the car together. And we have come to a truce. My wife is very much a fiction reader, which I am not. And so we rotate books. So she has a fiction book that she wants us to read or listen to, and then I have a book that I want us to listen to. So.
And that's how she fell in love with all the work of the economists that you.
Yeah, not so far. Although, I won't even go there. There was one economist that she did find very, very interesting. Right. Yeah. All right. So what's the most misunderstood part of being an author?
That it is a viable source of income, I think, is the most misunderstood part of being an author.
Are you saying there's not really a whole bunch of money in writing books?
It's not a popular thing to say. You might call me a dream killer to some people, but I think it's the truth. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with a recent trial that the DOJ had whenever 2 of the big 5 publishing companies were thinking about merging, right. And then they denied them that. But in that trial, a lot of statistics came out. And one of those was that 96% of all books sell less than 1,000 copies. Yeah. It's just so I'm not quite at 1,000 copies, but we're pushing it. And it's like, the top 4%, seems pretty good, but that's just me. So
I have heard that 5,000 copies is kind of the break point. That's the
for
point.
Publishers.
Yeah. That's the point at which they
Critical mass, you're going to blow up after that?
Possibly, but at least you won't go broke per se.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So you need another job, right? Even if you sold 5,000 copies, that's not going to pay your mortgage.
Right.
So if you're a teacher, professor, preacher, really anything, you need a day job.
But see, now that she's on this podcast, we will push her past the 1,000 mark.
Okay,
right?
well, I'll let you know if you do.
I guess I never thought about that. Is there a big proportional difference in like hardback versus audio versus Kindles?
In sales?
Yeah.
So my personal strategy, if anybody's listening who's an author, my personal marketing strategy has been, again, I really want to encourage people to read my book together. I think book clubs, Sunday school classes, life groups, whatever, or just, fostering greater community between some people. Hey, let's read this together. Hey, there's study questions in the back. There's additional study questions on the website. So for people reading it together, I offer them, if you buy a print copy, then I will give you an audiobook copy. Because I'm like you, I like both. I think, especially if you're going to talk about it with somebody, you want that print copy so you can like flip back to it and read it but to actually get it read, you need the audiobook copy. So I like the combination. And so definitely I've sold more print copies and I've given away more audiobook copies. But it's a little hard to say on that.
All right. Okay. Well, our last get to know you, and what's one belief you have that tends to put you at odds with either your peer group, your colleagues, your family, any of them?
So I actually have like two quick answers to that. Okay. And one is, as James knows, like in this day and age, my deep conservatism. I worked for a conservative member of Congress, and at this day and age, puts you at odds with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And then the other is I recently converted to Catholicism, and being, raised as a Southern Baptist and living in definitely majority Protestant Bible Belt territory, even among my close friends and family, just my belief in a sacramental life now puts me at odds with them.
I wonder if you've ever heard the term Romophobia.
I haven't, but I can definitely understand it.
Yeah. Once you get to like, oh, that's bad just because it's the kind of thing they would do. Yeah.
Did you get a lot of people in your family or your friends or whatnot, your network, like, what are you doing when you convert? I mean, was there those kind of conversations of
they didn't phrase it as what are you doing, but definitely like, tell me how that happened. Right. I'd like to hear more about that.
No, that was I had two thoughts. That was one. I was like, I would really like to know what and what led you down that road, right? The other one was, well, that's Micah, and she's always doing something different than the crowd, in some way, shape, or form. She's never traveling the same road that everybody else is. So I didn't find it necessarily out of character, but I did find it extremely interesting.
Yes, that actually is probably what I was thinking when you were asking about the curiosity porn to be in with. They'd probably just, think, oh, she's another thing she's doing that's crazy on this podcast.
All right. Well, let's get into the book. Yes? Yeah. One more time, just for the audience. The Unseen Battle in Unexpected Love Story is the title. Obviously, you don't want to give too much of the story away, but can you give us a blurb? What is your book about, and what are the big themes in it?
Sure. So again, the very short blurb would be, it's about the lies that we believe. I mean, so it's a little bit of a modern take on the Screw Tape Letters, in that it has demons and angels fighting over a woman's marriage. So we have three voices in the book. There's the demons that are fighting to destroy her marriage, the angels who are fighting to save it, and then a woman's journal driving the action of the story. But essentially what it's really about is the lies that we believe. It's about deception. As Americans, as people in this age, the 21st century, in some cases as women. So that's what I was most interested in and wanted to explore, is that deception.
Very good. Your book incorporates a variety of concepts and references that someone who is not very familiar with Christianity and maybe even a distinct kind of brand of Christianity might not readily understand. So for readers who are curious about the book and its message, but are not particularly religious, how would you advise them to approach your book? I mean, what message can they take away from it without being deeply knowledgeable about Christian terminology or concepts?
So the book is fiction. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that gives it a wider audience than, yes, it's definitely about issues of faith. Sure. It's definitely about spiritual realities, but it does not purport to be truth with a capital T. Like, I do not believe demons write letters to one another. For like this is not theology. So actually, one of my beta readers actually was an atheist because I wanted to get that perspective. Okay, what if somebody who doesn't believe in God comes? How do they view this story? And actually, I gave it, which is not too surprising, I gave copies to all my family for Christmas, including my 20-some-odd-year-old nephew who lives on the West Coast. So, as you know, like the culture is very different
That's a good way of
here
putting it.
in Oklahoma than it is in church life and religious life. And I was really surprised that he wrote back and said, "Oh my gosh, I just finished your book and it has so many great pearls of wisdom." And I was like, "Really? I'm so glad that you think that. What exactly did you take away from it?" And so, not even to conjecture, but what he really said, he thought was very smart observations about how we tended to trap ourselves without realizing it, how we tend to be critical of things instead of approaching them with humility, how admitting our faults is the hardest thing when it should be easy. And just in general, had him thinking about what being a good person really means. So I think those are all things that anyone, sure. Who doesn't necessarily live in this culture that we're so steeped in can take away from the book.
I can say that all of that kind of resonates with me, having read the book as well. That I think that's regardless of where you're coming from in reading the book, you can pull some of those themes out pretty well and apply them in a variety of ways. So.
And I looking over some of the materials for the book, I really enjoyed, I like what you're saying about it's approachable because it's fiction. I loved that you had this like foreign demon traveling and then conversing with local demons about like how things were. And I'm just imagining that I really started imagining like The Good Place, the television show. Where,
I love The Good Place.
Maybe they're all in an office being like, "Oh, so you're a new kid around here," as they're standing around and let me tell you how it works. Friday is not casual Friday, I just thought it was a very interesting idea.
That's kind of how we treat new faculty.
Right. And for the listeners who haven't read the book, it's the idea that the demon who's Twist Tail, the main demon, he's the senior demon in the Western Hemisphere. And there's this new demon from the Eastern Hemisphere. Like, this is how we do it in the East. And it's like, I don't care how you do it in the East. This is America. This is how this is going to go.
I think there's something to that, in a broader perspective too of, in our culture, there are different things that open us up to different weaknesses, different challenges, right, than in other places and in other cultures. And
other times.
Exactly. And our culture still being, I know we have become more of a secular culture than we were in, 1776 or 1787 or whatever date you want to pick in American history. But it is still true that Christianity it looms large over America in some form or fashion. And we're having arguments about that, right? And maybe we'll get into some of that, talking about some of the themes more specifically in the book. But I think that exposes American Christians to certain things that Christians in other parts of the world might not be exposed to, as far as weaknesses of thinking, weaknesses of how to perceive certain things.
Right. And I think that was actually my motivation in writing it. Like, I'm an American Studies major. That's what, and I was in Capitol Hill for, so long. And so I'm very interested in this unique experiment in self-government that is America. And then again, that's just those things that we believe that we don't even realize. Like, one of my favorite jokes is about, the two fish swimming along, and the other fish comes along and says, "How's the water?" And the fish says, "What's water?" Right. So it's like when we're in it, we can't see it. So I just want to and actually, honestly, I mentioned that I converted to Catholicism just 3 years ago. I started writing this book 10 years ago. So the majority of the book was written, from a deeply rooted in, Protestant, mostly Southern culture, American Christian culture. But I feel like that process of converting to Catholicism actually helped me to get outside the fishbowl, to actually see the things I couldn't see when I was inside of it.
Wow. You said something about your motivation for writing this book. And we should say, we've used this phrase like 3 times now. It's about a crisis of faith, but not merely religious faith. Your main character is having struggles with believing in herself, having faith in her marriage. What was your motivation for all those themes, very particularly about marriage? And do you see it accomplishing the goals you had set out for it?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things that people could come to this book or want to take away from the book. And one of them, I feel I get the response from people saying, oh, people who are struggling with their marriages need to read this. And, that wasn't my first intention. I mean, I do believe that there are evil forces, that they are real, Satan, demons, those things. I do believe that they are attacking marriages. I think that's, one of the things that isn't fictional is true, is that our marriages and families are under attack. It's not an accident. So I did want to draw attention to that, to help change the narrative. So if you believe that you're doing something that's hard, I don't know if you guys read this part of the book or not, where the demon talks about like, oh, if you tell them that they're climbing up a mountain, they're going to, relish the snow in their face and, the pelting, ice and the wind. But if they believe they're sitting on the couch, they're going to not tolerate for a second a drop of water from the ceiling. Like, what is that? Like, and so I think that the narrative of what you're doing in marriage, like, this is something important. This is something hard. This is the foundation of society, and it is under attack, is going to help you to put the necessary energy into, making that marriage work. And if you believe, oh, this is like, oh, are you better with them or without them? And, if you're better, then dump him, then you're going to separate. You're going to be isolated, and then you're going to be vulnerable, because that's a big theme of it, is that is what the forces of evil want. They want us isolated. They want us vulnerable rather than in community and in connection with one another.
How have women and men responded to it? You talked about getting some feedback. So what's some of the broader feedback that you've received?
Sure. So women gravitate towards it. They are all over it, right? It's like, oh, I was at this conference and I was like, I had just a table set up and they're like, what's your book about? And it's like Screw Tape Letters for Women. And, and they're like, oh, great. Right. It talks about how they attack your marriage. And, I got this audiobook available with it. They're like, oh, sign me up. So men, and people are like, oh, are you getting responses from men? I get, oh, I didn't think I would like it, or this isn't the type of book I would have picked up. But I mean, the most men that are reading it because they're part of a book group. Like, I actually just met with a bunch of people, kind of a Life Church small group that had just read it with their small group. So it was all like 8 couples over like 8 weeks. And, they voted on, they were thinking about doing the Screw Tape Letters, and somebody said, hey, why don't we try this instead? And they said, okay, well, let's look at it and let's vote. And they actually said one of the things was, they're like, one of the men actually said, there are no women in the Screw Tape Letters at all. Like, there's like practically, and I was like, well, there is mention of one little one who, likes tea with their toast or whatnot. But the men, they're saying, oh, I really love it. I mean, that is the response I've gotten. Actually, we are doing a discussion between the 2 services at my church. And one of the most enthusiastic one is a single guy, probably in his 40s, who has bought like 10 copies to give to others. And he's like, oh, I liked your book. And then I got to the end, which I'm not going to give it too much away, to say that there is a twist at the end, because I like those kind of stories that have the big twist at the end that makes you look at the whole thing differently. He's like, I got to the end and I was like, this is a much better book than I thought it was. I thought it was a good book, but now I'm buying copies and giving them to all my friends. Sure. So I have got really good response from men and women, but definitely more initially enthusiastic from women.
Okay. Well, in the book, you offer some pretty pointed criticisms of American Christianity. And you seem to argue it's beset by a whole bunch of ailments, right? excessive consumerism, harmful thinking from higher education, enticements of technology and social media, Christian nationalism, and a flirtation with identity politics. So can you walk us through some of these criticisms and explain why you felt it was important for you to highlight these in the book?
Well, that is the book is basically kind of the answer to that question. But
I know, and it's hard to talk about this without giving away a whole bunch. And we want people to go out and buy it because we want to push you past
and
that
read it. We want them to
That's
read
right.
it. That's what I want. Buying it's great.
But you really need to read it. Yeah. Right. That's right. But I really found this fascinating, the range of criticisms, first of all, that you offered, because depending on who's reading it, you might have offended somebody on the left, somebody on the right by the particular
equal opportunity.
That's right. No, I mean, it was very broad in the way you did. And I just found that very, very interesting.
Well, maybe, can I put a spin on this? Maybe I'm curious to know, was this a book you started writing because you had all of these issues in your head, or was it a book that maybe you had one or two, and as the book developed, you started to realize this is becoming a criticism of bigger things, even as I'm writing it?
Mm-hmm. So the very, real story of how I started writing it was actually that I was really exploring it for myself. I actually was in a situation that, in a lot of the book, a lot of books is autobiographical, right? I mean, none of it actually is actually biographical, but the elements. So it's actually something that's kind of described in the book, but I had decided I was going to do something, and I was so convinced that it was the right thing to do. This is the good thing. This is the right thing. It's the hard thing, but someone's got to do it. And I was so proud of myself that I was going to do this thing. And then I mentioned to my husband that I was going to do it, and he kind of tactfully told me a little story that made me realize that what he thought of me doing that, and made me realize okay, you know what? He's right. That probably isn't the best thing. But it just kind of fascinated me that not that I was, misguided in my thinking or that I was going to do the wrong thing, but that I was just so convinced that it was the right thing. And I was like, if I was a demon, that is what I would do. I wouldn't say, oh, hey, come over here, lie, cheat, steal. Let's do this. It'll be fun. It'll be cool. It would be like, oh no, this isn't wrong. This is not, it's not only okay, but this is righteous. This is what good people do. And I thought, well, I was so convinced, I was so deceived. Would it be helpful to start thinking like a demon just personally, to try to shed some light? Because I was really want to know, what are these lies that I believe? And a good example, this was not in the book, but just in my personal life is, again, I was a press secretary, and I was also a Christian. And, being in press secretary in the early 2000s and the 90s, I thought that I was fighting on the side that's all the good and right by lambasting the people who did not agree with me. And it never occurred to me those scriptures about love your neighbor. Well, that does not apply when, you're talking about your political enemies, right? God doesn't really expect me to, be kind to President Clinton. He doesn't. And I was so deceived by that. And so I thought, okay, I really want to just kind of explore what other things have I been wrong about. And so I guess those things that are in here, a lot of them are the things that I have been deceived about. So I feel like maybe but then of course, also just, of course, looking broader to the American church as a whole, and the things that I feel like are, again, good examples are pride, right? I mean, as Americans, we don't think that's even a sin. That's a virtue, right? You have to have pride in your country. And it's it does top God's list of things he hates is pride. So, or this overemphasis on, again, individualism, or this idea. It's actually just a fallacy that we are independent. No one is independent. I mean, we were all children at one point. We'll all be, well, if we live long enough, elderly, and even if in between, this was actually an author I just recently read, Leah Labrisco-Sargent. She talks about this, like the holiness of dependence and like embracing that. And it's like this idea, like women realize it sooner because they, bearing children, they realize that they need help. But really, it's just a very small window of time that there's even you can believe that you're independent, that you don't need other people. But yet we foster this as this great virtue of being independent and not needing anyone else and not relying on anyone else, when it's really not true to the human condition or like all of generations past. So it's just these unique little, but it never occurs to us that this is a deception or a lie.
I'm going to get a lot of comments from some folks about that.
About that?
On independence, yeah. So,
okay.
I mean,
but I agree.
There's a reason that solitary confinement is a terrible punishment.
Right. No, that is exactly right. And I think, I tend to think in terms of interdependence, but I will just say that window for some of my children seemed to be open a lot earlier.
Thinking about your kids
than some of the others. I'm just saying. For some of them, it seemed to open up really, really early. There seems to be, in the broader aspect of things, this resurgence of interest in the family specifically, both in the academic and the literary world. I think your friend Tim Carney recently authored a book called Family Unfriendly, which is about how public policy itself is not helpful to families. Melissa Kearney, who's an economics professor at the University of Maryland, recently wrote a book called The Two-Parent Privilege, discussing the impact of how marriage rates and higher rates of single-parent households affect the future of people. And so there have also been several news articles and commentary noting declining birth rates, declining marriage rates. What's, in your opinion, is sparking this renewed interest in the family?
So I agree with you that there is a kind of resurgence of interest in there. I think it's because our foundations, I feel like I felt personally experienced this. I don't know if you guys did, about 2019, 2020, just feeling like the whole world had been turned upside down. I felt like what I thought was bedrock is no longer bedrock. Like everything's upside down. Like I need new handholds. I need to go back and reevaluate like what can be depended upon. And that's partially what led me again to, the conversion to Catholicism. But I think the family is bedrock. I mean, it is, there's a quote from Pope John Paul II, as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. And I think that is absolutely true. So there's all this talk in recent years, and it's coming to even maybe recent decades, of diminishing the role of the family and like, chosen family. And it's really, there's not so important that you have a mother or father or even your bonds. You have no responsibility to those people. You can just cut them off if they, cross your boundaries or whatnot. And, there's always a seed of truth in all deceptions. And so there is a seed of truth somewhere there, of course, that sometimes you sadly and painfully do need to sever ties. But instead, it's become just like, it's just the same as any other relationship, and it's not really significant or important. It's not really the bedrock of our foundation. And if we lose it, like what is society even standing upon? So I think that there's just a recognition of like, oh wow, this is something that is really important that we have kind of tossed away. And again, I feel like it is an intentional deception because it is so important that it's not an accident that it's being attacked.
I think, if you ran in conservative circles back when we worked together for the congressman and after that, you were exposed to a lot of data and a lot of information showing how the breakup of families was detrimental to society as a whole. And it seems like there are people who may not be coming at that from that conservative bent, but are now coming back to saying, wait a second, there's something here. And I think especially of folks like Melissa Kearney and her book, which was very much using data to show the impact of single parenthood on children, talking about marriage rates. And there's been some really good data on how just marriage itself benefits people, both if you think in terms of their wealth accumulation, if you think in terms of their mental health, that marriage is a plus on those. And so it seems to me like some people who maybe had not come to this from the same perspective that you or I had come to it are starting to come back around, and they're starting to use a lot of data. And then now we have books like yours that are coming at it from more of a spiritual angle, more of a cultural angle that says, hey, we need to take family formation seriously and think about the work that it does for our society. So I just think that's interesting that we're seeing kind of that mix of approaches to this topic.
Right. And I think that, again, that goes back to a little bit of I feel like story and narrative is so powerful because people don't generally use data to determine their behavior, right? It's interesting, maybe policymakers are affected by it, but, people don't ask people to marry them usually because, they think, okay, this is going to be good for wealth accumulation and whatnot. But I think if we did have...
That's how I proposed to my wife.
Do you have a PowerPoint? Was it, okay, I think...
Here would be all the quarterly earnings here in 10 years. Much higher.
Right. So I think we get instead this, thinking that it's like a fairy tale or that it's a convenience even, or, it's a protection. And those things might be, again, have a seed of truth in them. But I feel like we really need a narrative of this is a really hard thing. This is a really good thing. This is something as a society we should protect. This is something that's kind of the foundation of all true joy and fulfillment in our society. This is what, is what we need is, to continue as a society. So calling people into versus what you get, in young people today, I think a lot is almost the opposite. It's irresponsible to bring children into the world. Oh, the environment, you're doing a good thing by not marrying, by not having children, which is the opposite message and opposite of the truth.
Sure. No, I think that's exactly right. That we could have a long conversation about that, but let's get on. Yes. You have two sons who are both teenagers. Number one, have they read your book yet?
So they've read parts of it.
What would you hope that they would take from the book as two young men, soon to be adults? Mm-hmm. Right. What would you hope they would take?
So James, I'm sure as a parent of 5, right?
Correct.
5. I'm sure you're not aware of this, but there are some things that especially teenage boys do not want to hear from their mother.
I've heard that rumor.
So I think this is part of why we need community. So I would love for them to take away all kinds of, wisdom. But I think the reality is they aren't going to hear it from me. So they need other people in their lives to communicate these truths to them. So actually, again, one of my beta readers was a 17-year-old high school girl. So I have had people, and one of my other friends bought the book and was driving home, and she texted me and said, is your book appropriate for 12-year-olds? Because mine has been, is on page 60 and took it to bed with her. So I was like, so again, it has an appeal to, and another thing I was super excited about was when I had some boys over, I think they're playing games or something. And when they left, they said, they wanted to take 2 copies of their high school boys. And I was like, wow, I'm so glad that, they want to read it. So, but again, unfortunately, I don't think my boys are going to get the message from me.
If you turn it into a graphic novel type of edition or a video game, you might get, that seems to work with my boys.
Possible.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, this is a religiously, spiritually themed book, and yet in your bio, it says you come from a fairly religiously diverse family. I'm wondering, were there challenges, or maybe I should say successes and challenges that came with your experience in a religiously diverse family?
Sure. So actually, I've gotten a lot of people that respond to that line in my bio on the back of the book that says, politically and theologically diverse. What do you mean by that? So my husband and I are from different political parties, and we have been, since we were married. And it's a bigger deal when you live in Washington, D.C., and when you work on Capitol Hill. And I was worried about that when we got married. And in fact, it has not been a huge obstacle. I actually wrote an article for Christianity Today in 2016, right after Trump's election, about how I felt that our political differences have made us better Christians and the benefits of that. And you can get that on my website, by the way, because Christianity Today is behind a paywall now. But the theologically diverse is then, of course, I've converted to Catholicism, but my husband and boys have not. So we attend both Protestant and Catholic services generally every week. So there's the diversity there. So we're navigating, which again, I feel like one of the advantages is it gives you really good practice for loving people with different views, which I feel like is something that a lot of us could really use these days.
Your work reminded me of, and I did horrible preparation and did not actually look up the paper that I'm thinking of right now, but a recent work that I encountered about sort of the changing social structure of marriage through the years in terms of like what we expect to get out of it. And the paper was basically charting a historical path where like not even 100 years ago, let alone 200, 500 years ago, did we put like such tremendous expectational pressure on one person to be like everything for me, as a spouse. But you would rather have like a broad network of relationships throughout an entire community, one of which, and the important one of which, was a spouse. But like you didn't just go home and expect that one person to be that entire web of people.
Absolutely.
And so I'm wondering, given that, I mean, the shaking faith in a marriage is such a theme in your book, do you think there are things that we're lacking today that like social organizations, civic organizations, churches, synagogues, could there be things that these organizations could do to make marriage easier and more supported, and families as well?
Right. There's a lot to what you just said. I agree with it. Absolutely. I think that we'll just take it apart a little bit. First, that we expect so much of the one person. I think that, again, that's part of this narrative that makes it almost impossible for, they say expectations are down payments on disappointment. So my husband and I, we personally, were married later in life. I was 30 and he was 40 when we got married. And for what it is, he has always been very clear of that. He's like emotional support is not like his strong suit. Like he has lots of really great qualities. That one is not. So he's always been like, hang out with your girlfriends, like go on trips, do the things, like go talk to all the people. He's very supportive of that because he's like, that's not something I'm going to be able to probably give you all that you need. And I think that's very healthy. But, other people like say, oh, but this is what society's made me feel like that I should get from you. My husband needs to do this. He needs to be my best friend. He needs to be, the first person that I want to go and talk to about all the things. It's like, well, maybe not. Right. I think that just, again, the way we view marriage needs to be kind of changed to be more of a intentional commitment, a sacred commitment for the purpose of, building society, of providing a safe place for children, and less of a personal me fulfillment. It's to make me happy. That's not the purpose of marriage, to make an individual happy. If you're, not happy before you get married, you're probably not going to be happy after you get married. But your expectation that it is probably actually going to be that wedge that's going to drive you apart. So that's kind of the first part. Then the second part of your question is basically the idea of these third spaces, right, that we're kind of lacking. And actually, Tim, you mentioned Tim Carney, who did just come out with the book about the families. He had previously written a book called Alienated America, which is about our political divisions. And in that book, a whole premise of it was these, we used to have these third places, like the Lions Club or these communities where we got our fix of basically like being involved in political and having influence, and they've disappeared. And so then we've kind of shifted all that expectation onto the national scene where we really aren't equipped. It's very hard for an individual to actually have any impact. So that's the whole premise of that book. But I think there's a lot of different people who have brought up that idea of that third space and like these community organizations, whether it's your church or your synagogue or your social group, that have kind of disappeared. And I feel like it's insidious, even in little things like these days that we hear this ideas of like, you don't really need to be social and to get out and to like leave your, basement and your Netflix, and like how much social interaction can I even really withstand? And it's like, it goes back to the demons where they're saying these lies of it's the exact thing that you need is what they're telling you is the enemy that you're afraid of. Like, again, more in the demon's case, it's a little bit more of like the shame, you need to don't expose your sin. If anybody knows your sin, then that's the worst thing that can happen. And it's like, no, that's exactly what needs to happen. You need to bring that into the light and let it heal. And it's the same thing as like, no, too much social interaction. Like, no, that's exactly what you need. Like, it just because, like, I heard something lately of even about introverts, people thinking that they're introverts. And it's like, not having social skills is not the same as being an introvert. It's like, just because it's difficult for you, just because you don't know how to do it, it makes you uncomfortable. It's what we need as humans. And so the idea that you don't, or it's the sickness, it's causing you anxiety. It's causing you anxiety because you don't do it, right? It's like running and walking causes you pain because you haven't exercised those muscles but your body needs it. So that's probably too much on that. But.
No, I thought it was great. I like the idea of probably the expectation undermines the goal, right? In other words, like my marriage probably would be I'd probably be pretty happy in my marriage if I didn't walk around expecting that one person to be in charge of my happiness all the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice.
I have no comment. No.
Your wife listens to this show?
Sometimes I can get her to listen to the show.
Hey, I'm allowed to say pretty much whatever I want as long as I'm willing to sleep in my car.
Yes. So. No, there is that rule in our house as well. I do think there is, with AI and all of that coming along, I've been hearing some different folks talking about the ability to create an AI version of a loved one in perpetuity, right? Oh my goodness, and heard that. Yeah, no, and so the goal, the conversation was along the lines of, well, if I create this AI and it's the perfect replica of this person, well, then I don't need to meet anybody else. I can just have this person. And it wasn't, the conversation was not like, oh, look, this is a great thing. It was just, you better be prepared. This kind of stuff is coming. But yeah, I think a lot of people, number one, I'm just going to throw this out here. I think happiness is overrated in a whole variety of things. Happiness has never been my end goal, right? And there are some things that make me happy, some things that bring me some joy, but I just going around being in a state of, happiness and smiling, that's not my end goal. And I think people oftentimes, we get deceived about what brings true happiness as well. I did enjoy the book, and I am not a fiction reader, and it has been a while since I have. My wife, as I have said, has made me listen to some audio books, but she's got me trapped in the car and I can't run away. So, but I did enjoy the book very much. I thought many of the themes I identified with very much. So, if you're interested, if people are interested, the name of the book again is The Unseen Battle, an unexpected love story. If somebody wants to go and find this book, what's the best way of finding it?
Well, you can go on Amazon where 90 some odd % of all books are purchased. So that's probably the easiest for people. So just on Amazon and search the title. It's also available on Audible. And there is also my website, MicahLeydorf.com. So you can purchase it there, but it's fine to purchase it. Also, if you live here in the Oklahoma City area, it's available at Commonplace, at Full Circle, at the Trinity Mercantile, St. Thomas More Books. There's several local bookstores that are carrying it. Second Story Books. I love local bookstores. I love to support them. So that's a great place to actually get a physical copy as well. But Amazon is probably going to be the most easiest, especially if you got Prime and it just comes directly to your door.
All right, Micah. There is a question.
Yes.
That we ask all of our guests at the end of our program that we consider to be the most penetrating, crucial, consequential, monumental question that we ask anybody at all. And it's a thought experiment. But if you were to leave right now and you had to go do one of two activities, and that is watch an episode of one of two shows, either Seinfeld or 30 Rock, which of those do you think you would choose to watch?
I would probably choose to watch Seinfeld.
No!
Wait. It's not because I think Seinfeld is more clever or more funny, because I actually think 30 Rock is.
Rescued it.
It's the nostalgia element. I don't know. Again, at this deeply conservative nature of mine, I find myself, hungry for things that remind me of ages past. And that's what Seinfeld does.
Seinfeld is up 1.
How did we?
I'm just saying.
I feel like we both. I don't even know where to consider that.
No,
a win
I'm
for
claiming
both of us or a loss for both of us.
No.
I just got told my show is funnier than your show.
Yeah,
but not preferable to your show.
That's right, and that's all that matters. What would you? The question was, which would you prefer to do?
No, that's true. That is exactly how I asked it. Yeah,
I'm gonna have to be precise here on that one.
Maybe you have to rephrase the question.
Yeah.
Thank you again for joining us today. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we might even have to have you back sometime.
Would love it.
If you got another novel that you're working through, we definitely will have to have you back once that project.
There might be a sequel or prequel. I don't know.
Okay.
In the mix.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we will be back next time. Any parting thoughts?
No, this has been a great conversation. Glad to have you on. Thanks for listening to Curiosity Porn with the two best intellectual pole dancers in the United States, Dr. Guy Crane and Professor James Davenport. If you'd like to share a comment about today's episode, suggest a guest or topic, or just leave a compliment or complaint, you can reach us at curprn@gmail.com. We hope to hear from you.